And just to give you guys a little bit of background, my name is Sunay Vaishnav, and I have with me Ryan McDowell. Both of us work on the Flow team. I'm a product manager. Ryan here with me is a senior developer. And today, we are going to talk about embedding Microsoft Flow within your own application. So the theme of today's workshop, or rather session, is a little different. The audience for this session is really customers or application owners, rather, who want to integrate their services within Flow and the larger business application platform. So without further ado, I'm going to start, with our slides. So what is Microsoft Flow? Microsoft Flow is a product that helps non-developers work smarter by automating workflows across apps and services. Extending your application with Flow empowers your end users to build automations with your service and other services that they use. You can do, quite a lot with Flow. You can do things like get notifications, copy files, synchronize data, and a lot more. Approvals is one of the features that, a lot of our users use within business organizations and other types of constructs. So now that we know a little bit about Flow, how can Flow help you as an application owner? So as you may have noticed, Flow has over 2 million, the business application platform has over 2 million monthly active users. Flow accounts for about 1.2 monthly active users. We integrate with over 200 SaaS applications. This includes both first-party Microsoft connectors as well as third-party connectors like Gmail or Slack and so on and so forth. So if you have customers that are using all these applications and you want your application or service to be part of this ecosystem where they can connect and join their data between all these systems, it makes a lot of sense for you to build a connector on the Power Platform. So that's what we're going to talk about for the first couple of minutes. Why you should build a connector on Flow and the business application platform, what are its benefits, how to go about submitting and publishing a connector. And then we'll talk about like a few other steps that you can take to increase the use of your efforts and see more benefits from it. So you can create templates on the Flow platform to help your users create more automations. You can also embed Flow within the product, within your product, and have your users leverage the functionalities that are made available by Flow directly from within your product. Your users probably don't even have to ever leave your product to access Flow. So that's what Ryan's going to demo a little bit further on. So since we know now the context, why should you build an API? How should you build an API, and how should you go about thinking about structuring your APIs so that Flow, Power Apps, and even Logic Apps can connect with them? So before we do that, let's talk about what makes up a Flow so that we can keep in mind why we would build an API in a certain way. So a simple Flow on the screen shows that it starts with a trigger, right? And then you can do a couple of actions with it. Building actions is a lot easier because they don't really have to check for events. Versus when you're building triggers, there are mainly two types of triggers. One is called webhooks, the other one's called polling. Webhooks are something that we recommend that you implement within your service if you want to expose triggers on your connector. So the way webhooks work is Flow will register and tell you, hey, if something changes for this specific object or event, let me know. Versus the other option is polling triggers. And polling triggers, the way they work is Flow will continuously ask your service that, has anything changed? Has anything changed? And you probably reply with, no, nothing has changed, or something has changed. Polling triggers are a little heavy in terms of the amount of API calls that get made to your service, but that's essentially the main consideration between webhook triggers and polling triggers. So this slide covers why you should build webhook versus polling triggers, why you should expose triggers in the product, because the more triggers you expose in the product, the more things your users who are using your application or service, they get to run flows based on things that are changing within your services ecosystem. Um, so yeah, and then once the trigger fires, you know, you can define actions. So if your service has, I mean, let's take for an example third-party service like ServiceNow, which manages incidents. A canonical example would be to file an incident. But what you would want to also, your users or ServiceNow users would also want to, you know, trigger flows when incidents are created. So building triggers and actions that go hand in hand, and if you think through the scenarios, that will give you a lot of insights into how you should structure your APIs. So once you have thought about how you want to structure your API, the next step is to go build a connector. And building a connector is quite simple. Flow, Power Apps, and even Logic Apps, which is in Azure, have the same sort of UI to go build a custom connector. And then once you go build a custom connector, you can also share it out within your organization. So as you can see on the screen, we have over 200 connectors, and your connector can be part of one of these connectors. The custom connector that you would build can be shared only within the scope of your tenant. But when you publish a connector, it gets published to all Microsoft Flow, Power Apps, and Logic Apps users. So that's the difference between a custom connector and a published public connector. Now, why would you want to build a connector? Like, sure, I talked about, hey, there are all these nice integration points, and your customers can benefit it, but what about, you know, your service? What do you, as a application or service owner, get by building the connector? So there are a couple of advantages of building a connector. One, you get to put your product in one of Microsoft's up-and-coming platform, right, which is the business application platform. There's a lot of visibility around these areas. 2.2 or 2.2 million users get eyes on your connector. You also get, if you do publish your connector, you also get to blog about scenarios on the Flow blog or the Power Apps blog and go through GTM campaigns, which help boost you know, the number of users that will eventually come to your product. So it's like a brain share between Microsoft users and third-party products. It also allows you to help your users build automation and customizations with Power Apps very easily without you yourself having to do all this work. So imagine if Flow did not exist, and if you wanted to establish or supply some workflow automation capabilities in your product, you would have to build a workflow engine yourself. By just building a very simple connector, you can now have your users be able to use automation capabilities through Flow. You can have them build custom Power Apps on top of your data and your application by exposing the connector in Power Apps. So that's mainly the reason why you would go build a connector. So this is kind of a mini case study, and I'm going to talk about why we build connectors. So Microsoft itself has a log analytics service that is internal to Microsoft, and we also have a incident management service called ICM, which is similar to ServiceNow. And our employees built these connectors and shared them with all the employees at Microsoft, which in turn led a lot of our users to go build flows against analytic services and incident management services. Since Microsoft is a software company, we have a lot of engineers that work with incident management and log analytics, and their lives get so much easier just because of these automation capabilities that were built into Flow by just building a connector. So that's kind of how useful a connector integration into Flow or Power Apps can be. And if you don't own a publicly available service or a product, that still doesn't mean that you can't benefit from this. If you own a service within your organization, build a connector and see what you can do with Flow and Power Apps once that data integration point is created. So how do you go about building a connector? As I mentioned briefly earlier, there are a couple of steps to it. The first step is to have a RESTful API, right? So once you have a RESTful API, then the next step is to think about authentication. And Flow supports primarily all the canonical types of authentication. We support API key-based authentication, basic authentication, and OAuth 2.0. And OAuth standards are pretty, well, it's a standard, not really a prescribed way to go implement something. So we also have customizations and policy support that allow you as the application or service owner to customize how auth works with Flow and Power Apps through your connector. So once you have built your connector, now this is for services that are publicly available and not internal to organizations. So if you're selling your product and there are API endpoints that you make available for your customers or users or developers working against your service, then you can also publish your connector. The requirements for publishing a connector are also quite straightforward. You start by developing a custom API. You share that out within your tenant, get some usage on it, get some feedback from your internal customers, and then see how robustly it works within Flow and Power Apps. Once you have enough confidence that your connectors are working well, then you can go to the link that's in that slide, which is AKMS/API connectors, and you will find information on how to get a connector certified. The process is, again, quite simple. You submit a open API or a Swagger file along with some assets like icons, name, description, and so on and so forth. And Microsoft itself will go deploy this to all regions across the world where Flow, Power Apps, and Logic Apps are available. And you can opt in or out of having to have your connector be available for Logic Apps, which is in Azure, versus Flow and Power Apps. But one connector works across all three products. So it's one effort exposure in three products: Power Apps, Flow, and Logic Apps. And then in terms of maintenance and updates, you can absolutely go do that. So it's not necessary for you to expose the entire surface area of your product through a connector. You can start with one trigger and a couple of actions. And then over time, as you see more usage and demand, you can add more things to your connector. So that's like step one, right? Like you built a connector, you did an integration with the business application platform. Now Ryan is going to talk about how you can go take this even further. How can you make it super easy for your users to create canonical automation scenarios with Flow templates, and what does it take to embed the Flow widgets within your application? So with that, I'm going to give it over to Ryan, and he will show you a nice, really cool demo.
Thanks, Sinay. So as Sinay mentioned, once you have your connector available publicly, you can submit templates to Flow and define some automation for typical scenarios that your users might have for your connector. And this allows people to quickly start using your connector. They don't have to think so much about what scenarios they want to go and create a flow for. They can just have out of the box 3 clicks and get Flow running that talks to your service. So it gives you integration with first-party Microsoft connectors, Flow-provided connectors and actions, other third-party connectors. You can set up a flow that talks to all these different services and get an automation scenario out there for your users. Once you create a template, you can submit it on the Flow website, and we can get that into our template store, and so it'll show up as one of the many templates that are available for users today. And then I also want to talk about, now that you have these templates and you have your connector available, you can actually extend that further by embedding Flow into your website. So when people go to your website, you can present these templates or flows that are created for your services and let users use it directly inside of your website. So we call this the Flow widget. It's basically just a nested piece of the Flow portal and the same user experience that we have in our Flow website to inside of your website, and you can do approvals, templates, run flows, manage flows, edit flows. All of that functionality is available for you to put wherever your users are using your site. So it can be used with your own connector, without your own connector. If you just want to let someone on some website run flows directly from there, you have that full capability here. So the process is pretty straightforward for doing this. We have some nice documentation on the Flow website about how to do this and a sample application, but basically it requires 3 steps just to get started. You need to create a Azure Active Directory application with permissions to get tokens to talk to Flow. You embed some JavaScript that we've created to allow you to talk to and render Flow embedded inside of your application. You tell it where you want it to go, and it'll create an iframe and host Flow directly there. And then you tell it if you want to show templates, if you want to show flows, if you want to show approvals, that sort of thing. We have a few. There's a list of like 6 different widgets that we support. And so template and manage widget are 2 of them. This is just the difference between how you would do that. It's pretty straightforward, boilerplate. You tell it which widget you want to show, and we can render that pretty quickly. So I'll now take you to, so in the Azure portal, this is what a typical, oh, that's not demoing. Do I need exit presenter mode? Okay, so here we have the Azure portal. This is a application I created this morning for demoing this. It's pretty straightforward. This client ID here is basically how you tell Flow to talk to your application. You set up authentication with a redirect URL back to your site for AAD to get tokens. And the main part here is you set up, so you add API permissions to talk to Flow. So Flow's right here, you click it, you have approvals permissions, Flow management, Flow read permissions. So if you pick those, and I think I missed, here you tell AAD that you need to get ID and access tokens, and then you're done with the first step, you're ready to start embedding the Flow widget. So this is the documentation I was talking about. Integrate Microsoft Flow with websites and apps. There's some walkthroughs here, explanations about what to do. And then down here is a sample application you can download. So it's just a zip file. You can download that. I've went ahead and downloaded it already. And basically, the only change you have to do is there's some placeholder here for where we put that client ID from that AAD application we created in the previous step. So that you can get your access tokens, and then you run it. The sample application just runs as a simple Node.js application. You run it on your machine, and you get basically a simple website that looks like this. So this top part here, the sign in as, access token, all of that would be your website itself. You give users the ability to sign in.
So while Ryan is getting all that set up, this is just to demonstrate how easy it is to go embed components of the Flow website in your own custom application. So if you have a UI or UX front-end facing application, and if you wanted to embed Flow capabilities, all you would need to do is download that zip file, figure out the auth handshake, and then turn on a couple of flags, which will then let you do like specific types of implementations within your website itself.
Right. So what we have here is the flow widget. So this is how you manage flows, run flows. It's the same thing that you would see on the Flow portal for here, just embedded inside of your site. It lets you, so here you have run, you can run flows, edit them, share them, create new flows, and then you can load the templates widget, so you can tell it which types of templates you want to show. We have a few categories, and then you can click on a template, create that template here. Oh, I think we might be running into some connection issues. But basically, you can go through that process of creating a flow based on the template, and then you'll see that show up immediately inside the manage widget we showed. So here, you can embed the editing experience. You can create flows right from within your website. So we just created this flow here. Then, I don't know, do you know where that went?
Did you click save?
I thought so.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Let's try
basically-
that again. I think if we have some time. Which one did we try?
This one
Oh,
here.
the weather one is pretty simple and straightforward. While that gets set up though, I think the important point that we want to drive home here is like if you build a connector and then you have this ability to like create your templates that can get certified and put in the Flow product itself. And then you can use these templates in your product now, and we allow categorization of these templates so that you can basically have a list of all the templates that you think are important for your users. And then your users can simply click around in your website, and they will get the full Flow experience of creating flows without ever leaving your application. And then all of the management experiences and other things are built in, so you don't really have to worry about anything except embedding and like putting that JavaScript code in. So yeah, I think we are at time. So with that, we are going to wrap up this theater talk. And if you have any questions, we'll stick around over here for just a few more minutes, and we are happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much.